Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June edition of the tinyML Trailblazer series. And thank you for joining. Today, we have a very special guest. It is Dr. Mouna Elkhatib. She is a co-founder, CEO, a CTO of AONDevices. It's a very interesting company doing a lot of interesting IP and silicon in the tinyML space, and that's kind of the story she's going to tell us today. And tinyML Trailblazer series is the place where you're going to meet people who drive the tinyML field forward by developing software, hardware, solution type of technologies and companies, and they will graciously share their success stories and also their ups and downs type of stories. So basically today you're going to get inspired and educated and illuminated by the Mouna and the AONDevices success story. So before we start, let me acknowledge tinyML sponsors and strategic partners. So this list keeps growing. It's AONDevices, which is part of Maximum Integrated, which is part of AONDevices now. AONDevices, that's the company we're going to talk about today. ARM, DeepLight, Edge Impulse, Emza Visual Sense, PhotoHub, GreenWave Technologies, Gravity Inc, HOTG, Imagimob, ITMIS, ClickerTech, Latent AI, Nota.ai, NXP, Prophecy, Kixo, Qualcomm, Reality AI, Rixen, Renaissance, SAP, Seed Studio, SenseML, Silicon Labs, Sony, ST Microelectronics, Stream Analyze, Synaptics, SynSense, and Syntian. And there are more companies joining this list. So if you're interested, also contact us at sponsorships@tinyml.org. A couple of announcements. We are very excited to host tinyML IMEA, Europe, Middle East, and Africa Technical Innovation Forum in 2022. It will take place in October 10 to 12. And it will be happening in Cyprus. And the reason for Cyprus, because this is a place where kind of the Europe, Middle East, and Africa are connected. So it's going to be an in-person event. Again, we are super excited about this. You can go to the website and check it. There is a link and the QR code. And if you're interested in presenting, call for papers is open until August 1st. And there are some still sponsorship slots available. So again, the usual contact the sponsorships@tinyml.org. Again, this will be happening in person in October. There is another event coming in a week time frame. So again, it's going to be a very interesting virtual event. As many of you know, there are many AutoML tools are being developed and deployed. So the objective of this workshop is really to review the state of the art of AutoML in the tinyML space. It will happen on June 15th at 8 a.m. Pacific. It's going to be an event for about 3 hours online. And you're going to see a dozen of AutoML companies in the tinyML space sharing their products, their technologies, and discussing where the future of the field is going to be. Again, it's going to be a very interesting format and very interesting topic. So I encourage you to register there. And registration is free for this virtual event. And our next tinyML Trailblazer series will be with Yoram Zilberberg. He is the CEO of Emza Visual Sense. It's a company, a tinyML company in Israel. They have some interesting recent developments to share, and it will take place on Wednesday, as usual, July 6th at 8 a.m. Pacific. And the host will be Chris. And you can register for this event now as well. A couple of quick things. The tinyML communities are growing, both the meetup groups. Meetup groups are approaching 10,000 people. It will probably happen in the next week or so. And there are 45 groups in 36 countries, really kind of a big, very vibrant community there. And so is the community on LinkedIn, also keeps growing, and you're very welcome to join this. And there are QR codes there. Today's presentation will be available on YouTube by tomorrow, so you can subscribe to tinyML YouTube channel for notifications and updates. And as I said, this video will be there as well. And this channel is also growing fast. It's about 7,000 subscribers and a lot of videos and a lot of views there. At this point, let me introduce our host. Although the host, Dr. Chris Rowen, he doesn't really need to be introduced to this community. He's very well known as an entrepreneur and as a technologist and as one of the tinyML pioneers. In fact, Chris was at the very beginning of tinyML. Currently, he is a vice president of AI engineering and products at Cisco. And before that, he was the CEO of the Bubble Labs, and the speech machine learning company that was acquired by Cisco 2 years ago. And before this adventure, Chris has done a lot of other interesting things. Most notably, he was the CTO of Cadence. It's a very, very high-level position at a well-known company. And he was a founder of TenSilicon back in the late 90s, where he was the CEO and CTO. And Chris has done numerous contributions to the field of silicon architecture and computer systems. Long history of accomplishments, really a very well-known person in this field. And his technical background is in physics and double E from Stanford and Harvard. Thank you, Chris, for serving to be the host of this interesting series. And at this stage, the floor is yours.
It is an honor to be here, and it's a particular honor to host Mouna, who is the CEO, CTO, and co-founder of AONDevices. I think her career is really a model for how really sharp technical people begin to make an impact on both the evolution of the fundamental science and technology and develop really interesting new business models and companies that have significant impact in this field. And AONDevices is a company which is really right at the heart of this tinyML movement, working at ultra low power on widely ubiquitous kinds of sensor-centric devices. She spent a long time at Qualcomm at more and more senior engineering levels. Her background is in coming from engineering degree at École Nationale Supérieure d'Électricité et Mécanique, and has many patents, and really, I think, comes today with a rich story of how pushing the envelope on the technology, and especially seeking to make broad impact to touch many, many different markets, meets up with the imperatives of building a business where you not only have to figure out applications, but you have to figure out who's going to pay for it and how is it really going to get deployed in the real world. So it's my pleasure to introduce Mouna Elkhatib. So welcome, Mouna.
Thank you, Chris, for the introduction. It's my honor to be here, and I hope I'll be able to address all your questions.
Yeah, Well, the place to start perhaps is telling your story. How did you come to start AONDevices? What were the things that motivated you? What was the problem that you were trying to solve? What originally did you try to solve? And maybe how has that mission evolved as you've gotten into the heart of it?
Okay, so AONDevices actually started by an engineer obsessed about solving a problem, basically. So basically, the problem that I really wanted to solve is to enable multiple use cases in the always on state. So always on state means it's something that is always running 24 hours 7. And in battery operated devices, it becomes very challenging because you have to be in the microwatts in order to not drain the battery. And as my career in the voice and audio, we have implemented always on functionality since 2012 in multiple devices, but it was limited to, for instance, a single wake word, which is very simple, as you can see in your phone, such as Hey Siri or others. Then the technology has evolved to, for instance, supporting multiple voice assistants in the same device, evolved to supporting sound recognition and others. So at that point of my career, around 2018, there were no solutions to support all these use cases at such a low power, which is basically a couple of hundred of microwatts. And that problem really bugged me. It's something that I wanted, like when I go to sleep, I think about it. When I wake up, I think about it. So I really wanted to solve it. And that's how I wanted to venture. And it was the first time actually in my career after 20 years working for big corporates, such as Connexent and Qualcomm, to just take a chance and go and research the problem and resolve it. And AI came as a tool, basically. It wasn't the intent of the company to be an AI company. It was really to solve this problem, which I strongly believe it's a really big problem, because we're talking today about enabling robots, enabling autonomous drones, enabling autonomous machines, basically coexisting with machines. And in my opinion, that would never happen if we don't solve the always on problem. Because think about it, we as a human, we are an always on system. We're always paying attention. We're always trying to hear the sounds and hear the other humans speaking and detecting the gesture of other humans. So we're constantly performing that pattern recognition to recognize each other's communication and messages. And in my opinion, that was and is still the real problem that we have to solve in order to realize all these visions that many people have, like Elon Musk and others, talking about cyborgs and all that. So that was the motivation behind AONDevices. And actually the name comes from that. It's always on device AI.
Got it. And so how did you recruit your core team? How did you figure out who also wanted to come on this journey and convince them that they should leave their very stable, well-paying jobs to do this exciting roller coaster adventure?
So luckily, I have lots of friends in the field, and that's what happens when you spend 20 plus years of experience in the same industry. So I'm well known by, if I want something, I really go for it. So basically, I contacted many of my friends, and specifically Adil Ben Yassin, who is very well known in the DSP field, distinguished engineer from different companies, as well as another friend, Daniel Schor, who worked with me also at Connexent. And it was important to select people who are really going to help you from system level down to transistor level. And Daniel is exactly like that, which basically similar to my background, because we want to offer a solution. I want to offer you something that you plug and it works. I don't want to offer you a chip or an algorithm or software or whatnot, something that you will have to go and seek the rest of the system. No, we at the end of the day, we're really a system company, and that's what I presented to my co-founders, and there were, like you said, pros and cons. Startup, I wanted to bootstrap. It's challenging situation, right? Versus their big salaries elsewhere and benefits and all that. But I was able, and actually I'm very able even today to convince anyone to join Aon, because it's really about the motivation and the love of what you want to do and the obsession about solving the problem. That's really key. It makes a big difference in your life versus just looking for, you know, the high salary and the benefits. So
Yeah. So tell me some more about the roller coaster, because every startup, every big effort has some ups and some downs and some unexpected twists and turns. What were some of the things that were most difficult or most unexpected as you put together the mission of the company, as you got into the marketplace and discovered the possible gap between reality and what you had imagined people wanted?
Yeah, so actually there were many of those cases in our case, because as you know, I came from engineering world. I really had no idea about how to build a company or anything, but I had one thing, which is really, like I said, the obsession about solving the problem, coming up with a solution for the world. That's the only asset I had with me, really. And from there, basically, I started searching, I started learning, and not only on the technical side, because it's very challenging problem to solve, and finding the right algorithm, and researching all the AI algorithms. And as a matter of fact, we even had to go down deep the dynamics of particularly LSTMs, and in particularly GRUs, and really understand the dynamics, understand does the thing really do the job that is claimed on papers. So that was really the big challenge, number one, because we bootstrapped and we didn't really worry about getting the office or getting more people or nothing. We wanted to see, is there a solution? Shall I even, believe that I'm going to build a solution? And that was, it took quite 6 months of extensive research, because we had to try everything that's out there and be convinced, is it enough to just use open source algorithms? Or for me to achieve this performance that I'm targeting, do I need something homegrown, something completely new? And that was very important and challenging. So finally, we understood the dynamics of many of the open source neural networks, and we found our own solution, and it did meet our performance. And as you know, Chris, you're from the voice and audio business, and as a matter of fact, your company was one of the companies achieving the good performance, which is 90% hit rate at 0 dB SNR, which with single microphone, which was important for us. Obviously it was a software, and for us, we wanted in the microwatts. So that was the bigger challenge. So once we solved that problem, then we started looking, okay, so I want to architect a company around this solution. And that's where we started investigating. Like, for instance, we applied to incubators. We joined the EvoNexus, which is a South California incubator. And thanks to some folks at Qualcomm who helped us, since I came from there. And we got a lot of support. In incubators, the beauty is you meet lots of mentors who help you with ideas, who direct you and tell you really what to do. The second asset we had is a local small business administration here in South California. They introduced to me lawyers and other, service companies that are mandatory for you to start a company. And actually, surprisingly, when I started, I really didn't know how much legal involvement to build the company, and you will be surprised that so much rigor, and you really have to involve lawyers to make it the right way, with NDAs and all the infrastructure. So architecting the company, once you architect the solution, you have to think about architecting the company the correct way. Then after that, the question comes, and actually everything basically it's like feedback system. While you're going in the journey, it's a feedback system. People tell you, hey, look at competition, they raise so much money, you can't make it without that. So the third decision you have to make after you build the solution and you architect your company is the funding. Do you want to bootstrap or you want to raise money at early stage? It's very critical. And each one has pros and cons. And our decision was to bootstrap. But because we were lucky enough that we came from the field and we knew a lot of customers already in the markets. And some of the customers, actually, they offered us to prepay a licensing fee for the technology, even based on simulation, before we even build the solution. And that helped a lot, and that really took away from us the worry of, do I want to raise money? And for me specifically, it was important to get design wins in the market, get the technology approved by leaders in the market before I can go and raise the hundreds of millions and all that.
Yeah, that's huge, because so often that is the validation of not just the technology, but the team and the business model. And if you can check that box relatively early in the process, then many other doors open. Exactly. And things get easier on many other fronts. If you have customers, you have logos, exactly. You have references.
Exactly.
There are two big strategic questions that come up with almost every startup, every tech startup, and emphatically it's true in the AI space. One of them is the business model question. Are you selling software? Are you licensing IP? Are you selling chips? Are you building systems? And the other is, across all of the possible applications that you could serve, how much are you providing a platform that serves many, or do you become a specialist in a subset of problems? For those two questions, tell us how you guided AONDevices to the solution you've chosen, the business model question and the vertical versus horizontal question.
That's a good question. And actually, it's one of the biggest challenges we had at AON. Basically, the original idea, as I mentioned, is we want to solve this problem for the world, not for specific device or application. As I mentioned, the robots, autonomous drones, whatnot, everything will need always on states in order for all these visions of machine coexisting with the humans. So then when you go with this idea, and then when you look at the market, you find that, okay, yeah, I can sell a chip in this application, but in our opinion, you can never sell an extra chip in the phone or headset because of the real estate. We come from the business. We understand you can sell a chip today, maybe for 1 year, eventually it will be integrated. So why go in that route if you know there is a bottleneck eventually that will block you? So based on that, then you say, okay, well, I can't sell the chip here, but it's very critical for me to penetrate these markets. Phone and headsets are very critical markets in order for the proliferation of this technology. So then the only choice is to license the IP in these applications while targeting the chip for the rest. So once you take this decision, it's a huge decision because it's not the traditional business model that people are familiar with. And as you know, it's very hard to take people out of their comfort zone and bring them a complete new idea. It's very hard. Mm-hmm. So, but still, because we're convinced, we know what we want from day one. And the only way to achieve it is really this dual business model Otherwise, it's not going to work. So we consciously took the decision to support this dual business model. And again, like I said, it's very hard. And up to today, and I'm sure yourself have a lot of questions running in your head, it's very hard to convince people, yes, it is doable, dual business model, but it is challenging at the same time. Now, regarding your second question, is do we want to choose a specific market segment, or do we want to target different markets, basically? Well, the good news is that the technology, you can build this basically to service multiple markets. And since the goal is to enable this always on, and always on exists everywhere, as I mentioned, really for us to get into the machine era that we're thinking about, and you see multiple visionaries talking about, of having machines and robots, whether in your houses or whether in stores and so forth, you really have to build this always on machine that is basically performing pattern recognition just like a human being. Like when we are here, I'm looking at the screen, my eyes are performing pattern recognition of what I see. My ears are listening and performing pattern recognition to recognize what you're saying and so forth. And that concept is very critical to create. Now, obviously, the challenge is, yes, you want to create it everywhere, but there is a challenge there because different use cases, different applications, like having machine in a car, for instance, to listen to the engine and find if there is an issue, is different from a machine that is in your headset listening if there is a baby crying and notifying you, hey, lower your volume. So these are two different applications. But in my opinion, it all boils down just like a human being. We are able to do it in different environments, and we should be able to make the machine do the same. Obviously, the big challenge comes into realizing this vision, which requires you to hire staff and sales and application engineers in different fields. But in my opinion, those challenges we can solve with the at the right time. Yeah.
So how do you segment the market? Because certainly, even when you talk about always on means different things. Mm-hmm. You know, always on sometimes, like in the automotive case, mm-hmm. actually there is an enormous battery or there's a generator. It doesn't have to be a microwatt. It could be 10 microwatts or 100 microwatts, and it would work fine. There's always on, which is kind of like a human. You put it in the stand, you let it rest and recharge every night. Mm-hmm. And then there's always on, like, you know, distributed sensors, which are energy harvesting, or they have button batteries and are expected to last a year. Those are very different power ranges associated with it. But what is the relevant partitioning when you say, oh, our sweet spot is here, or we don't attempt to go to that place either because it requires much more hardware than you have, or it requires a power domain which is so much lower. I have to be sub 1 microwatt in order to do something. How do you think about the shape of the market to understand what is inside and what is outside the easy scope for these ubiquitous low power applications? They're not all the same.
Yes, good question. So basically, the start point is really the use cases, what you want to enable in the always on. As you mentioned, yes, we can look at always on in different categories. But most use cases, like in the phone or the headset or battery operated devices, based on the battery that exists in these devices, for instance, in the remote control with the AA battery capacity and all that, you can't afford beyond a couple of 100 microwatts at the worst case. Mm-hmm. Okay, so that is the sweet spot that because we want to enable these new use cases. Now the challenge comes is you're starting from one specific use case at 200 microwatts, but you want to enable all these use cases and not increase the power. And that is the biggest challenge. And that's really the scalability you have to build in your devices in order to stay within that power range that we mentioned, while improving the use cases, adding more use cases. So that is a sweet spot, whether for the phone, the headsets, and the remote control, any battery operated device. And when I say 200 microwatts or a couple of hundred microwatts, it's in the 100% processing power. We're not talking about the always on just to wake up the system, for instance, in voice activity detection or all, because in real life, you have noises and you have speech all the time. So you really have to count on when your chip or processor is completely 100% operating. So that's for these battery operated devices. And you're right, like for instance, if you look in the automotive, yeah, you don't need that low power. However, with the trend of electrical cars and new specs and autonomous cars, these cars basically have to operate even when your car is in the off state. You have to monitor the environment. You have to understand the environment. You have to listen who is in the car. You have to listen when the user is approaching the car. So you have now this new challenge where even when the car is in the off state, you have to be monitoring the surrounding environment, whether with sound or speech or whatnot. So we see more and more trend to also support low power devices in the automotive space. And many people say nowadays a car will become a phone running on 4 wheels. So eventually it will be also have stringent specs on the power as well.
Right. I'm really curious. Since you started the company, can you talk about one big surprise? And I'm thinking of a problem kind of surprise, something that you really had to learn rapidly from, because what customers wanted or what the technology could do or what issues in forming a company didn't work the way you expected. So you really had to pick yourself up and try something different. Give me, if you can, an example of something that really required you to rethink some of your fundamental assumptions about either the business or the technology.
Yeah, so maybe we can start with the technology. So this field is evolving like crazy, like you cannot imagine. The minute you give customers a solution, they want this next step. So, and actually you will be surprised, because if there is no solution, nobody thinks about the next thing. But the minute you give a solution, there is always thinking about the next thing, you know? So, and we face this on daily basis, basically. Like for instance, we support specific use cases, and we were with this customer and they have like large AI teams and all that. So they say, oh, okay, great what you have, but can you do this? And it was like a long sentences, almost like NLP. We didn't this processor that is meant for a couple of hundred microwatts. So these cases really helped us to improve our system, to make sure our tools are scalable, can take a complete new use cases that you didn't plan originally. Because as you know, today, most of the market for always on speech, for instance, the support are for simple things like wake word or simple voice command and all that. But it evolved dramatically from that to, for instance, concurrently supporting speech and sound, to long sentences and so forth. So this challenge, we basically live it constantly, but it does help us in terms of improving our tools. And luckily, our hardware is built with enough programmability that you don't need to change the hardware. Basically, you change the tool suite. In terms of business, basically the surprise was like to everybody, the pandemic and all the challenges with it. Basically you're just starting this company, and everybody's just moving up and meeting customers, and for instance China is very important to us in this business, and all of a sudden you get these messages, hey, it's pandemic, you can't go to China, you can't demo, you can't. And we were about to get our chip and EVKs that you want to go and meet customers to show them the demos and interact with them, and that was a really big challenge for us. But luckily, as the whole world adapted with the situation, eventually customers also adapted, and we were able to overcome the issue by having conference calls and supporting them remotely, and so definitely that was a big challenge, and hopefully it won't happen to other entrepreneurs in the future.
So what about the future? What are the technical trends that you think are most important? And what are the business trends that you think are most important in this always-on space, and for AONDevices specifically? What do you see as transforming the problem or transforming the solution, say out 5 years?
Yeah, good question. So number one is really the use cases are becoming more and more complex. You start, for instance, in our case, we started with speech and sound pattern detection, and today we are supporting sensor fusion. And the reason is more and more the markets want to understand the context of the user, want to have more information about the user in order to take a better decision on the action. So for instance, if my device can hear a person calling for help, it's not enough for me to take the action to call a family member. I want to detect the person is falling or the person is screaming, so I have to detect the emotions, or I have to detect the body movement and the body gesture in order to take a more a correct decision, basically. And this trend, in my opinion, will continue and will try to mimic a human behavior, basically, exactly the way we take decisions as humans. We don't take them based on one sensor. We have 5 sensors, and we combine the full information in order to take a decision. So this is definitely going to stimulate a lot of innovation in the market to support these all complex use cases at the low power, to be able to implement them, for instance, in the phone or the headsets or wearables and hearables in general, because wearables and hearables will become an extension of the human body. It's just like a cyborg, basically. It is a piece of you that is really going to act exactly like you yourself. So that's one thing.
What are the technical problems that you're going to have to overcome to get there? For example, when you have voice samples, you can reuse that voice example in many different environments. If you are saying, I'm going to have a full range of sensors for every sample, I probably have more specialized data collection, because I don't want to just record the sound. I have to record the motion. I may have to record images. I've got this multi-dimensional data capture that I require now in order to get a useful data set. So, I mean, that's one possible technical challenge. What are the other things that you think we have to overcome to get to that, multi-sensor, sensor integration, full surround experience in these always-on wearables and hearables?
Well, the data is very important. The data set is very important. And since we started Aon, we strongly believed that a good small data set is much better than a big chunk data set.
Yes.
And actually our tool suite has been built around that. As I mentioned offline, with our tool suite, we can build the best performance out there with minimum data. Obviously, we have this data augmentation that is extremely has a lot of algorithms that synthetically augment that data in very reliable way that mimics human voices. And we scale that to sound and even to other sensors. So that at least relieves the dependency on collecting a lot of data. And I'm not saying a lot of data is not important. What I'm saying is if you have a big data set that is clean and good data sets, good for you. But if you don't, then you definitely have to build your system to not depend on big data. Otherwise, you will suffer for sure. So that's one thing. The second thing is definitely you need the data from all the sensors. You have to understand the dynamics of the signal from different sensors. And really, even though we say deep learning extract the features to latch to on its own, you as a user have to understand the signal, have to direct the machine. You can't just let it do on its own. You have to make obvious features for the machine to latch to. And to me, I always take a human being as the best benchmark. I tell the team, if you can do it, the machine should be able to do it. That's it. So if the machine can't do it, that means we're not doing a good job. This kind of beliefs are very important in machine learning, in my opinion, because it's unlike DSP, where we used to handcraft the algorithms, right? So you know you're doing if A and B, I want C. So you know that for sure. In machine learning, you don't. It's this machine that is learning on its own and coming up with the conclusions on its own. So that's the first. So yes, definitely you need the data sets. Yes, it is challenging, but we have to do it. This is the future for sure. You have to accommodate your solution to support different sensors and I'm sorry, you had the second question.
Well, actually, I wanted to just pause a moment and invite the audience to start posting some questions so that we can really take advantage of Mouna here. So, but I do have a related question that has to do with the scope of data being used. And in fact, one of the biggest emerging questions around use of AI is how do we be responsible? How do we make sure that the systems don't subtly incorporate bias, that we are building systems which are transparent enough that people will trust them, that we are ensuring that the systems are sufficiently secure and keep data private in a way that allows people to think of them as really being on their side, rather than being, somehow the systems become vehicles for undermining their rights, their privacy, their freedoms. What is the approach that you have taken to ensure that these systems are unbiased, provably unbiased, and secure and private and transparent in the ways that matter for your users and customers?
Very good question. And actually, I think the whole world should be concerned about this question. And in my opinion, there should be organizations almost like the FDA, just specifically to regulate the data collection and the bias in the training, in the machine learning, because obviously these machines we're training today maybe will be our bosses in the future. So we need to be careful how we do things. So the bias, this is something that we take care of in our tool suite. We need to make sure the training covers all the spectrum. As you know, if you train with more male voice versus female voice, that machine is going to be more favorable to male versus female. So that bias, definitely you need to take care of it in the training, and this is across all industries. We need to make sure the machine will be fair as what we are as a human. The privacy is also extremely important, and we have a full flow, especially we work with the big OEMs. It's very critical when they provide the data to us, we take care of it, and we make sure it's completely secure, completely. So we have an internal audit documents, how to protect customer data, how to make sure once you're done with the job, it's completely destroyed, and you don't keep it locally in your machines. So all these things are extremely important, as important as the privacy to a human being. You don't want other people to know your private things, and exactly that's what the machine, you don't want. When you get the data from other people, you want to make sure you have a flow internally that you share with your customers, so they are comfortable sharing the data with you.
This is one of the advantages of doing the ML at the far edge, is
Yes.
that you emphatically
Definitely.
don't need to upload data.
Exactly.
Now, of course, sometimes the real purpose of that function is it's serving as a filter. That is, it's always on.
Yes.
And it wakes up, it takes action only under very selected purposes. But then sometimes some of that data does need to flow up the pyramid, up the hierarchy.
Yes, and that is the key thing behind Edge AI. It's not fair to stream everything to the cloud, because not all the users are aware of what happens in modern devices, like our grandparents and all that. They have no clue when they talk to smart speaker that their speech goes to the cloud. So it is very important, and actually there are laws around that the data gets processed locally, and you open the funnel to the cloud only when needed, so that the user speech and privacy are preserved. But I still don't think we are doing a good job in this industry at educating the users about how the devices operate. I am wishing and hoping that we achieve a stage where we educate people around the world on how actually the devices, whether the phone, whether the smart speaker, and anything that is connected to the cloud operates. So we are fair to humanity of what we're doing in this industry. We explain to them how everything operates, and so that when they use the devices, they're consciously understanding what is going on. And that's one of my wishes that will happen one day in the field.
Yeah, just establishing some common vocabulary and some concepts so that people can say, this device is in this class and this device is in this other class, and they have some concept of what that means for how far their personal data flows. We have a question that's come in. It's a two-part question. I'm going to break it up into parts. I was wondering which competitors are doing a good job in this field now, and why. What does the competitive landscape look like, and how does AONDevices fit in relative to those other players right now?
Well, in my opinion, because I am very oriented in terms of performance, we need the high performance, because if the machine doesn't perform well, we will never trust it. It has to perform at least as humans. And the big OEMs in the field, whether Amazon or Google or Baidu, and these guys, they're doing a really good job at advancing the technology. However, they can't achieve the super low power that we need in, for instance, wearables or whatnot. Maybe they could to a certain extent, but in order to achieve the couple of 100 microwatts while performing all these functionalities, in my opinion, you still need a specialized solution that is particularly targeting that problem, rather than generic algorithms that perform well, but they're hardware hungry and power hungry.
Yeah. What are the companies that you run into, both in the IP business, where your competition is someone who is licensing some kind of an engine and software, and in the chip space, where someone is selling a piece of silicon and a software environment? Who are some of the common names that you run into as potential competitors?
Sure. So as you know, in the markets, in the edge AI specifically, there are two categories of companies. There is the pure hardware company or IP company. At the end of the day, it's still a piece of hardware. And they're focused on accelerators to enable fast processing of AI. That's one category. The second category is algorithm, which basically like Bubble Labs was, right? So they're focused on just creating that best in class algorithm. And we are here we're trying to really offer a solution. I don't want to offer you just hardware. I don't want to offer you just algorithm. I want to offer you a solution that really solve the problem. So with even our customer, we face competition. Hey, these guys, they gave me this hardware IP from different vendors. Obviously could be even Cadence or any IP vendor. They have this accelerator, and how do you differentiate? Where accelerator is, to me, is like I give you an empty brain. What are you going to do with empty brain, right? So the difference is huge, because I'm offering you a solution, not an empty piece of hardware. So that's the argument here. The second one is the software, where yes, you can have a good software, but then you have to run it into some apps processor or some ARM or something, and that will never beat my super low power IP or chip, because the hardware that you're going to use to perform that function, that software, was never optimized for that particular function, while my hardware was optimized for the actual algorithm. Obviously, there are limitations also to our solution, because this hardware is very specialized, and eventually you want to offer also customers to add their secret sauce, like some hardware where they run their own algorithms. And that's our next gen, where we have a hybrid solution with the current customized solution as the always on, because that one you can never beat the performance/power operating point. And then once I detect something interesting for you, then I wake up the open AI so that you can use your own secret sauce algorithm.
The second part of this question is there any sort of monopolies that might arise from this business soon? And I suppose that's sort of the question, is the tendency more towards commoditization? Lots of people offering alternative solutions such that you have very wide choice, but maybe very little pricing leverage, versus monopolies where it becomes so standardized around one solution that it's very hard to penetrate. What's the trend in this always-on IP and IC world?
Well, as I mentioned, there are all kinds of competitors, whether in the hardware or software. But in my opinion, if you know what you want the best performance at the lowest power, and you have experience to do it, it will be very hard to beat that. So yeah, a lot of people are claiming edge AI. Hundreds of startups are raising tons of money and all, and maybe they succeed in certain field. But to me, to particularly succeed in the always on at this super low power, at this high performance, it's very hard. And I talk based on 20 plus years of experience in this field.
Yes. There's another question now. Do you provide Whitebox IP or Blackbox IP licensing business model?
So I assume like open versus GDS.
I think there are lots of possible definitions of white box and black box. Yeah. So do the best you can to sort of describe, how much visibility of the internals of the IP is inherent in your licensing model.
Yeah, so the IP we license actually in a Verilog RTL, no encryption, very simple mangling scheme. And we don't have a problem even sharing our hardware IP. And the reason for not worrying about, losing the technology and all that is because the hardware really is nothing without the tool suite, which is completely an application-based tool suite. So like I mentioned, I can give you an empty brain, but what are you going to do with it if you don't know how to train it? So we don't have any concern sharing our IP in a Verilog format and even helping the customer understand all the pieces and help them integrate it and achieve the best performance and the best power in their own SoC, because we know that without the tool suite that has tons of knowledge behind the scenes, that piece of IP is really, it's basically you really need the tool suite to make it happen. So we don't have any concerns of sharing the knowledge of the IP and what we have implemented. Right. So in that sense, probably it's a white.
Yeah, so this is probably the right time to start transitioning back. Thank you so much, Mouna.
Thank you, Chris. It was a pleasure.
It has been great to hear how you've navigated what is, for many people, a tricky and almost insurmountable challenge. But you have, I think, pulled together a great team with a clear, differentiated value and are really pushing the envelope on a really important problem of audio and multi-sensor based intelligence in the always-on domain. Thank you, and congratulations.
Thank you, Chris.
And back to you, Evgeny.
Yeah, thank you, Mouna, for sharing your success story. And before we conclude, I would like to ask my favorite question, because success has many different facets, many different definitions. What does it mean for you to be successful?
To me, successful is, like I said, is solving the problems that bug me. So I think that's my focus. Everything else feels good, but I think solving the problem is the best, really. That gives me the best pleasure.
Well, thank you, Mouna. I think there are many problems around technical and business related. That means you're going to be successful forever. There are many things to be solved.
Thank you.
And thank you, Chris, for the moderation. I think it's been a great session. I really enjoyed it. And again, what AONDevices accomplished, it's truly remarkable to get to the point where you are with basically no funding and landing your customers and solving hard technical problems and kind of navigating this complicated landscape. I think it's very remarkable, and it happened in so short time. And your silicon tape out and all those things, it's really remarkable. Congratulations.
Thank you, Evgeny.
Yeah. Just at the end, again, I would like to acknowledge our sponsors. The long list is here, and one by one. ARM is one of the executive sponsors, Edge Impulse, Qualcomm, Syntient, Then moving on to the platinum sponsors, it's DeepLight, ClickerTech, Reality AI, Renaissance, and we have many gold sponsors for the hub, Maxim Integrated, which is part of Analog Devices now, Latent AI, NXP, then we have Seed Studio, SenseML, ST Microelectronics, SynSense, and silver sponsors, AONDevices, EMSA, Greenlife Technologies, then we have HOTG, ImageMob, ITMIS, ClickerTech, Hixo, Rixen, SAP, and Stream Analyze, and Gravity AI and Prophecy. So again, thank you for joining. It's been a great discussion, and we'll see you in a month at this series on July 6th. Thank you.
Thank you.